Okay, welcome grade 8 to your show you know for section 4.4. The question in the first show you know in 4.4 is dealing with the addition of GST and PST. So because we don't do that anymore, we have HST now. This is kind of an old question, but don't worry about it. We'll still do it, and you can still know how to do it in case we do go back to the old system. So when we calculate tax, we take our $35 backpack, and we're going to calculate the GST first. So the GST is that tax which goes to Ottawa, to the federal government. So our federal government gets taxes on everything in every province, and they use that money to build things like roads and pay for things like people who work at the GST Center and the Department of Veterans Affairs. That's where their salary comes from federal money, which is in part generated from the GST. The PST is for the province that you live in. And in our province, of course, it would go to the Charlottetown coffers so that they can allocate money to provincial employees like teachers and, I don't know, Department of Motor Vehicles and build things like roads. That's what our PST would go. And that comes from tax generation, and this is how we generate the money. So for this backpack that you're buying, the first thing you want to do is calculate how much GST will I pay on it. So the GST is the first thing. And we're going to go with 5% of the $35 backpack. And we're going to use a calculator for this. And this is actually, sorry, I should say this is method 1. And method 1 is just basically calculating the cost of each of these taxes and adding them on. So what is 5% of $35? Well, 10% is $3.50. I can do that mentally. So 5% would be $1.75. I can do that mentally. But if you didn't know that, you could say, well, 5% is 5 thousandths. That's 500ths, excuse me, 500ths, which means it's a decimal. It's 0.05 times 35. You can grab your calculator. Decimal 0.05 times $35 is $1.75. So that's the GST. That's how much Ottawa is going to receive from me purchasing a backpack for 35 bucks. So the cost of the backpack plus the GST will now make that backpack cost me $36.75, but we're not done. Now what we have to do is we have to take our PST, and Charlottetown's going to take, well, this is not Charlottetown's tax rate, but whatever province this is, it's going to be 6% of the new price, not the $35 anymore. The backpack now costs $36.75. So PST is calculated with GST included. So again, 6% is 600ths times $36.75. The amount of tax I'm going to pay on this for Charlottetown is 6% of $36.75. So the amount of tax that Charlottetown gets, or whatever province it is this much money, or approximately $2.21. We're going to round that up to the nearest penny. So then you take the cost of your backpack with the GST, add to it the cost of the PST, and you get $38.96. And that would be the price you pay for the backpack, including your GST and your PST. But there is an easier way to do it, and that's method 2. And method 2 is the non-adding method. It's a little confusing. I'll try and explain it as best I can. So the first thing is your GST, and that we said was 5%. Okay? And what we did is we calculated that, and then we added on the cost of the backpack, which is 35%. So in essence, 100% of the backpack would be $35, and 5% would be the tax. So instead of using 5% and then adding it on, if I was thinking of this as being 105% of the $35, the 100% would be the cost of the backpack, 35 bucks, and the 5% would be $1.75. So if I was to do 105% in one step, that would be both the cost of the backpack and the 5% tax. So let's see what that looks like. 105%, here's the pathway, is 105 hundredths, which is 1 and 5 hundredths, which is 1.05. That's 1 and 5 hundredths. And we know when we multiply something by 1, we get itself. So when you multiply it by 1.05, you're really getting the cost of the backpack and the tax combined. If we look at that, take our calculator. 105% times the cost of the backpack you get $36.75. And we got it up here. That's where we got the price of the first step, so $36.75. The second step would be to take that 100% of the new price and 6% for the PST. We're going to go 106%, which is 1 600 times the $36.75, our final price when we do that. So the cost of the new backpack and 6% extra, or 106%, of the $36.75, I get $38.955, or approximately $38.96, which is what I got right here. Okay. All right, so method 1 and method 2 are two methods you can use to actually calculate both of those. We're off. Okay, while you were gone, or while I was gone, I made a new question up to practice. We have an $80 item, and what we're going to do is we're going to have a 5% rate of GST and a 10% PST. And we're going to try and solve it both ways. So follow along if you don't know what to do. So the first method is simply calculate what is 5% of the $80. $80. And that would be 0.05 times 80, which if you use a calculator will be $4. Okay? So here's where most people make mistakes, is they think, well, the GST is $4, but that has to now get added on. So the $80 item plus the $4 GST gives you a new price of $84. See, the thing is, the PST will be calculated not on the 80, but it'll be calculated on the item's cost plus the GST. That's what the province gets to take money from. So the PST will be 10%, not of $80, but of $84. And we know with 10%, we move it over one place. I'm not even going to use a calculator for this. 10% of $84 is $8.40. That's your PST. This was your GST. So you take your $84 item, that's the price of the item plus the GST, and then you add on to it the price of your PST, and you get a final price of $92.40. That's using method 1. Now if you use method 2, it's a little bit easier. So instead of doing this step here, taking the cost of your item, adding on the tax, you can do it in one step. So if I take 1.05, this number is really, the 1 represents the $80. The 0.5 represents the tax. All right, so if I multiply this by 80, we know that if I multiplied 80 by 1, I would get 80. And if I multiply it by 0.05, I would get the tax. So by multiplying it by 1 and 500ths, it's both of them combined. Take my calculator. 1 and 0.5 multiplied by 80 equals 84. And if I want to further think about this, 1.05 is really 105%. 100% of the $80 and an additional 5%. So the cost, this 84 represents the cost with the GST. So now I take that, and I'm going to figure out the PST, which is 10%. So by multiplying it by 1, I'm going to get my 84. And by multiplying by additional 0.10, I'm going to get an additional 10%. Take my calculator. 110%, or 1.1, of the $84 equals $92.40. Both answers are the same. One required a lot less fake ink. So if you only understand method 2 and you don't want to increase your understanding of it, just do method 1 every time and you'll get the right answer. If you really get it, method 2 is a much more efficient way of getting the answer to combined taxes. Okay, so on the other side, the other show you know is dealing with discounts instead of taxes. So we're going the other way. So for this one, there's two ways you can do it. And I'm just going to first, this show you know is really just comparing why 50% off on one day is not the same as being 25% off one day, followed by another 25% off at reduced price the second day. Why are these not the same thing? So let's look at it. So the first thing we're going to do is just choose an item. So I'm going to make it that same $80 item that we used in the last show, and we're going to use that as our price. So at store A, we have an $80 item that's going to be reduced by 50%. So the discount will be 50% of the $80 item is going to be taken off. So 50% is easy. Mentally, that's going to be $40. So if I needed to, the $80 item, subtract the 50% discount, will mean the price I pay at store A will be $40. I'll pay $40 for a 50% discount. But at store B, they're going to give you a 25% discount on the $80 on day one. So 25% is 0.25. And we learned how to do this mentally. 25% is half of half, so half is $40. So half of half is $20. So it's a $20 discount, which means if it was $80 to begin with and I take away the $20 discount, at store B, after 1 day of a 25% sale, that $80 item is going to cost me $60. All right? So they don't sell it, and they're like, well, we didn't sell it. Now what do we do? Well, let's take 25% off it again. So 25% of the new price, not the $80, but $60, is going to be what they discounted this time. So that's 0.25 times 60, but we can do it mentally because half is 30, and half of 30 is 15. So the discount on the second day will be a further $15 discount. So $60, take away a further discount of $15 will equal $45. All right? Now up here, the cost of that item with a 50% discount was $40, and the cost of that $80 item after 2 discounts of $25 ended up being $5 more. Well, why did that happen? Well, because the 25% of $80 gave us this number. But the second discount was 25% of 60, which is not going to be the same as 25% of 80. If it was 25% of 80, we would have had another $20, which would have brought our total to $40 as well. But because it's 25% of 60, that second day discount only saved me an additional $15, not the $20 that I would have saved had it been 25% of the $80. So that's the reason why it doesn't work. Okay? All right. Now, let's look at this from a standpoint of how do I do this in 1 step versus 2 steps. So let's look at this discount ID again. So let's just take a new page, actually. Let's take a $80 item, and we're going to try it 2 different ways. We're going to try figuring out what is the cost. I'm going to use method 1, the one we just practiced. What is the cost of that item if I save a 20% discount? Okay, so go ahead. I'll press pause. You guys go ahead and figure that out. Okay, so if you found out the 20% discount, you would have said, well, 20%, as if decimal is this. So 20% of the $80, mentally it's $8 for 10%, so $16 for 20%. Take the cost of the item, subtract your 16. The cost of the item after the discount would have been $64. Okay, this is going to be called a 2-step solution for discounts. Step 1 was find the discount, and step 2 was subtract the discount from the cost to get your final price. Method 2 is a much easier approach, and it's easier than the tax method. It's a 1-step. And here's what it boils down to. If you had a 20% discount, what percent did you pay for? Anybody? If you have a 20% discount off the price of something, what percent of the item's price did you pay? 80%. So let's look at this item. Here's the item. If this is a 20% discount, I'm going to take that off. I am paying for 80% of the item. This is what I pay for. So instead of calculating what is 20% and then subtracting it off of it, I'm going to say what is 80% of the $80 item? What is 80% of the $80 item? Multiply those two together and I get 64. Okay? So rather than calculate the discount and subtract it from the cost of it, if you ask yourself the simple question, if this is my discount, what percent of the actual item am I paying for? Simply use that percentage and calculate it once, and you'll have your answer. Okay?